a good report that the all participants chat is grayed out. We had that issue earlier last week when we did this webinar, and it may be a WebEx update, but just for everyone's accessibility, because some people are just calling in on their phones and more listening in than having a visual, or depending on the device that you're logging in from, you may not have access to the chat. It may be harder to access on a phone or a tablet versus a laptop, for example. So when we have both our polls that Lisa's getting ready for our first poll and discussion or questions that come up in the chat, I may just pop my glasses back on to read those. If I can, I think I can see them pretty well.
The glasses weren't that bad, Dana. I was just trying to give you a hard time.
Yeah, I know. That's what we do is old friends.
Old friends.
Old friends.
Right.
So our first poll, as we get rolling this morning, and welcome everyone, for whatever time zone and level of breakfast and caffeination you have in your system. Poll question 1, are you recognizing volunteer or staff efforts in the past year? So for 2020, are you starting to celebrate it this year for the last year? Yes, no, or not sure yet. Poll question number 2, if yes, did you alter how you recognize and award volunteers? Yes, no, still deciding. And 3, do you recognize and award paid staff? No, just volunteers. Yes, usually both volunteers and staff. Yes, usually both, but this year only staff. And that third question really relates to a lot of volunteer activities have been paused, canceled, shut down because of multiple crises, but mainly the pandemic, and also knowing that a lot of the clients that are on these webinars and exclusively are from the healthcare sector, and I know today we also have food services and things that some parts of our sector have been able to respond with safety protocols and pandemics and not shut down volunteering as much, or it's been hard for them to do without the usual number of volunteers, and others have been able to make that pivot a little more easily. So because it's been such a mixed bag in 2020 and even going into 2021, some of these same circumstances will, of course, continue for a while. This is what we're talking about today with our voices. And again, if you're able to use the chat, but for any reason can't access the poll feature, feel free to give these answers in the chat and we'll read them out. So there's a couple minutes left for that. Lisa, if you want to go to the next slide while we wait for our poll answers, we'll kind of dive in.
I will. I thought you might first want to introduce the panelists, Dana.
Yes, I can introduce the panelists. We saw their bios as we were getting ready, and we have a few new audience members, as Joan called out, and a lot of return fun. I am Dana Litwin. I'm serving as MC. I'm part of the VSys Voices. We also have Joan Cardellino, who has extensive career, very specific skills and experience in the healthcare sector. Jared McCannell, who comes to us with not only multilingual and singing abilities, but a lot of experience in emergency response, emergency management type volunteer sector expertise. We have our own Todd McMullen. Hi, Todd, who loves to wear funny hats, and that'll make more sense as we get on with this presentation. And Todd is part of the VSys Voices expert panels and really is a technologist and really gets to the heart of how we're using technology, not just the wonderful VMS of VSys 1, but just kind of technology and trends in general in the sector. And I've done a lot of presentations, including on gamification of volunteer engagement, which I'll end up talking about a little bit later in this session about how to recognize volunteers. So as we get our poll answers going, we do want to say that we at VSys and all the voices and bespoke software really, really appreciate the wonderful level of participation that you all have had in our webinars in 2020 and going into 2021. We've got some great feedback, and we also recognize that this has been really, really tough for all of you. So the fact that you're here and listening and learning. We salute you. We give applause in your general direction. And this session today, like most of our sessions, is very interactive. So we have information that we, as the panel of experts, can impart of what we know with what we've heard already from other sessions on recognition that we've done last week, for example, what we see as trends, what we've done for our organizations. And this is also a place to really value the wisdom in the room. So we have polls, we have questions, we have discussion, and it's really up to all of you how much you want to participate in the chat and ask to unmute in conversation. But understand that you are absolutely welcome. This is an interactive experience, and we're kind of tailoring where the discussion goes, hitting on a few key points and pieces of information, depending on what you all want and need today. So we've got our poll results, and it looks like the majority of, it's kind of half and half. Again, a lot of people can't answer with the technology that they have in the poll, but most people have recognized, or about a quarter of the people have recognized their volunteers. For 2020, they're going to have something. A couple of no's, a few not sure's, and about 8 no answers. So this sounds like a perfect topic to get into. Are you still considering it? You're not sure? This might help you make that decision with the information you have today. And if yes, did you celebrate volunteers and staff? And it's pretty split. It's about 15-20% each way for yes, no, or still deciding whether it's featuring staff and volunteers. And recognizing only staff, it looks like we've got, again, pretty even across the board, but no, just volunteers. I haven't run into a lot of organizations that only recognize staff, even under the weird circumstances of 2020 and getting into this year. So this is really great to know that of our audience today, this is a great sample that, yeah, you're having a pretty typical experience of mostly still trying to decide how and what to do, which is perfect timing for where we are today. Wonderful. Thanks, Lisa. If you want to go to the next slide, we'll get our discussion kicked off. Thank you for that. And some applause for Lisa juggling multiple tech things behind the scenes while I keep the flow of the conversation going. Now, this is where we're asking you, what are the challenges? What are the challenges of recognition that you're either trying to decide right now, that you have previously faced in 2020 and looking forward into 2021? And you can answer in the chat, and I'll read those answers out for everyone, even if it says grayed out for all participants. And Lisa will, in her many, many things that she's doing behind the scenes for tech, try to kind of capture the notes of the conversation onto this slide. And these materials, not just the recording, but the slides itself with the answers filled in from our discussion will also be available for review. And let Lisa know if you'd like to be unmuted so that you can join into the conversation. So as people start to fill in the chat or ponder that, Joan, what are some of the challenges that you've seen in the healthcare sector around recognition in 2020 and this year?
Well, healthcare sector awards generally, not always, are in 3 categories. One is years of service, 2 is hours of service. In many cases, many auxiliaries and hospital volunteer departments and fundraising organizations offer scholarships to students who are entering careers in healthcare and who have, made a significant contribution of hours to the organization to enable them to be eligible for that scholarship. So I've been polling my peers, asking them, what are you doing about PINs for hours of service and years of service since your volunteers have not been working? The answers a month ago were markedly different. I started asking this a month ago. At that time, many organizations, their volunteers were not active at all. And within a month, surprisingly so, anecdotally, I'm hearing more and more are bringing their volunteers back in. So they do have a workforce that might be small, that might be eligible for awards. And some of them also have workforce that have worked straight through the pandemic that might make their volunteers eligible for awards. That being said, my answer kind of was all across the board. What are you doing for PAMs? What are you doing for years of service, our traditional ones? What are you doing for scholarships? And are your volunteers back, or have they worked through the pandemic in order to qualify for an award? So I would love to hear from those of you who are on the line from healthcare in the chat box. What have you been doing, or what are you planning on doing? Because we have notes for ideas about what you could do this year that might be different. So I'm trying to get a feel of, are you going to go the traditional route? And so some of you alluded to that in the poll, but if you have any additional comments, I would love it if you would add them in the chat.
Thanks so much, Joan. And while people are adding that in the chat, again, I'll read it out loud as we get answers. You can ask to unmute, and Lisa can tell me that a certain person is speaking up. So Nancy, who's in Ontario, would say we would still be honoring years of service. So pretty traditional, not changing too much in how that's going. I'll wait for some other answers in the chat. Jared, what have you noticed in the many sectors that your career is covering? What are you hearing out there?
Yeah, well, thank you. What I'm hearing and what I'm experiencing myself is that the same challenges we had with volunteer retention, which, in my personal opinion and experience, volunteer recognition and awards, things like that, is part of a bigger volunteer retention plan. And so what I've seen is that that was already a challenge for people, having enough money in the budget, planning for it ahead of time. It's sometimes difficult to be planning for recognition when you're just trying to get your program off the ground. And so what I've seen is that the pandemic has magnified some of the already challenging issues that many of us have had with this particular aspect of volunteer management. What I like to remind folks of is it's never too late to start to plan and develop your retention program, and with recognition being a huge part of that. That's kind of the cornerstone, of that retention plan. But one thing I also like to remind folks is you can recognize and value your volunteers all year long. It doesn't have to be a one-time event at the end of the year or just in April during volunteer month. It can be through simple acts of attention. If you say you're going to give them a 90-day review, give them a 90-day review. that once in a while opportunity to touch base, that shows your volunteers that, that you're interested in their success, that you value their time. And so, if possible, my suggestion this year is simply continue to do those things that you would do. If you have to do it on Zoom or have to do it on WebEx or over the phone, then so be it. But still, touch base with your volunteers throughout the year. And that way, when you do get to the recognition, whether it's an event or a month, or a week, or however you decide to do that, that you're not just pulling out of the air, these awards and this stuff. You can really look back on the conversations you've had with your volunteers and build from there. That retention and that recognition, that really comes from the relationship building. And that doesn't have to stop during the pandemic. It has been challenged by it, but those are aspects of the ongoing volunteer management process that I think really strengthen the overall efficacy of your recognition efforts.
Exactly, Jared. That's a great point, and that's one that we, as all of the VSys voices, want to emphasize all the time. That volunteer engagement is every interaction, it's every moment, it's every email, it's every phone call, and the organizations that really survived or thrived through the challenges of the pandemic in whatever sector they are within volunteer services were the ones that kept some sort of engagement and contact and communication very clearly and steadily and open and honest about like, well, we're not coming back, but we want to keep in touch with you, and we have these even social things. So again, that every moment an opportunity is kind of, I would say, every interaction is an invitation to stay or an invitation to go. And that's even more true when we're not in person with each other. So we heard from Anne-Marie Nicholson that they're not sure yet. They'd like to do something for recognition. They didn't do anything last year, but they're not exactly sure what. And maybe years of service? Well, Anne-Marie, this is exactly why this panel is here. So we have some ideas. Yeah, you may also, we encourage you to share ideas with each other of what's worked and what hasn't, but we've definitely got plenty up our sleeves and in our slides to share. And then Nancy Tanner added on to her previous comment about years of service that auxiliary has postponed scholarships at this time. And I know we've got kind of a dedicated slide to what traditionally has happened, especially per sector, like what's been happening in food, what's been happening in human services, animal services, healthcare services, disaster services, literacy, the arts, and how we can adapt each of that. So this is great stuff. Let's get into how we're recognizing. Lisa, if you could please go to the next slide, and again, put it in the chat or ask to unmute. And Todd, what are some of the ways that you recommend we pivot to recognize people as we move into more of our virtual online remote viewing world?
Thanks for asking. I'm going to kind of dovetail a little bit with what Jared was saying about relationships being the cornerstone. I mean, what we're really trying to do here in building of them. And I'm going to suggest that considering the current circumstances that we're all in, it's just an idea, but don't limit the recognition to the scope of your own operations. In other words, volunteers are out there doing good stuff, especially under these circumstances, all the time. It may not have anything to do with your organization, but if you could find out what it is just by your interactions, or if you already know because you are interacting with them, feel free to recognize them for the good stuff they're doing anywhere, for anyone. You know, the volunteer who has taken their mom in to protect them from COVID. I don't care if it's the guy who's, been nurturing the neighbor's puppies because they couldn't do it because they were sick. It's anything, absolutely anything that they have done that is positive, that is good, that deserves to be recognized, even if it has nothing to do with you. And have fun with it. I mean, you see me with my silly hat on. I believe that how we go about recognizing is in some ways even more important than what we recognize them for. And if we're having fun and enjoying ourselves, then they do too. And that becomes its own recognition, if you will. And they look forward to the interactions and to their next opportunity. And isn't that what volunteering is really about? Is enjoying giving and that kind of thing. And then I'm sure we'll have a chance later to get into some of the technology methods of that. Mechanisms, if you will, but in general, those are my thoughts. Find out what they're really doing that's good and celebrate it.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Lisa, with I think you have 6 different arms to type all these things and do all these things as I ask. So if you actually can go to the next slide of they're kind of speaking to what Todd and Jared have mentioned, and this will kick back into Jones in a second. If we understand kind of where we are with these things and how that works, I'm also getting some information in the chat that not everyone is able to see the slides, and that is probably something in your own WebEx settings. If you're on speaker view, you should have control, again, depending on your device and browser that you're using, to see full screen or click away from speaker and into a different view option. But again, the slides are either I'm also reading them out loud if people are just on the phone or they're having trouble seeing them. I'm reading out loud what we do in polls, what we do in chat, and we're mainly using the slides to capture the answers that our panelists have or that you have in the chat, and all of this will be bundled up in a PDF and available to you later on.
Yes, I was just going to add, Dana, that we are recording this webinar, and the recording will be up on our website. So I'm worried that some folks are calling in on their phones, so
exactly.
they can't see the slides. And we will definitely have that up on the VSys Voices webpage. Usually it takes a couple days, but it will be up there by next week sometime.
Exactly. And just for the sake of accessibility, that's kind of why I'm reading everything out loud. So what we've been working with, and what the slide says, is there's no new normal in volunteer management. Recognition has gone virtual or online, and there's a lot of new approaches to planning, producing, and presenting these ideas. So even if someone is taking the traditional approach that Joan was speaking of we're still, we're counting hours, we're counting years of service, we're counting, the number of people we have, boots on the ground, recognizing teams. That's great. We're just really changing the medium that we're using. So rather than a big event in person, let's say, a sit-down dinner or potluck or whatever social thing might have occurred in the past, we're doing it online, and that just takes a little bit of adjustment, getting used to sometimes new technologies, and just takes a slightly different project and event planning than what we're used to. So if we go to what awards we are doing in 2021, I think that's a good place to jump into. And Todd and I know, have some really good ideas, and I know Joan and Jared have some great ideas as well. So, Joan, what have you seen for how people have adjusted their recognition in because you're very involved with Sacramento Dovia, the Directors of Volunteers and Agencies, and you're still very plugged into a lot of VSys's specific healthcare clients, but also, across other sectors as well.
So I see a lot of people taking a moment to pause and say, well, what are we going to do? Again, the answer changes based upon whether your volunteers have been already working since last March. So the answer is somewhat easier, and that is you just go virtual. For those of you who have not had your volunteers working, and I'm in the weeds on this with a lot of organizations and Sacramento Dovia as an example, we've been rethinking the whole thing. First of all, we were thinking, we have to something for April. And then we realized, well, that rule goes out the window. We don't need anything for April. We just need volunteer recognition. So that could be year-round, and you turn your program year-round, and have a card writer volunteer who's writing your cards every month and calling and all. But the other thing is we switched here in Sacramento, and I see some other organizations do this. We've pushed back our awards ceremonies and activities to May and June, where here in California they're saying people 65 and over should have their vaccine by that time. So we're consciously moving everything back. And if I were you, I would think about that. Don't be tied to April. If you're still in the midst and your organization is still in the midst of COVID challenges, you have it in the summer. So the timing of it is something that is to be considered. The other thing is your budget. We've seen a lot of organizations have their volunteer department budget cut for 2021 since they don't intend to have volunteers working that year. So you have no recognition budget. There are lots of resources out there online for recognizing volunteers without a budget, and hopefully we'll be able to post some of them on the VSys website. But certainly looking at your budget and anticipating, particularly if you're a July 1 year, what's your budget going to look like? If you have budget money up until June 30th, you have a little bit more flexibility. Most people don't think about, but they really should take a look at what the bylaws say if they're a 501c3 to see what their bylaws dictate concerning awards. In circumstances like this, bylaws can always be used just as a guideline and not as a mandate. But just check the bylaws if you're a 501c3 to see what they do say about awards, and then acknowledge the changes that you are making in writing so that you're in compliance. some of you will still have formal award ceremonies online, and we'll talk about that. And some of you are planning on formal award ceremonies online. I often say and advise people to talk to your fundraisers. Fundraisers are not just down pat. The fundraisers that did for COVID-19, they're making money hand over fist because of the story. But they also, in conjunction with that, have been working with companies that convert their fundraising events online, their dinners, their award ceremonies. So make sure you check in with your fundraising peers. You might be able to come in on their coattails or use the same companies or techniques or technology that they've already developed internally to have award ceremonies online. Certificates versus plaques. I just want to say something about this. A lot of people that don't have money have been used to buying plaques and keys and giveaways. Convert to e-certificates.
Yes.
Cheaper and better.
Yeah. So that's all. That's a great way to kind of pivot to it. And the core thing here, and what's up on our slides of what to do with awards in 2021 is really to make sure that it's the fun kind. That primarily, we need a lot more fun in our lives in general right now, facing multiple crises in multiple areas. And, when there is a serious and acknowledgement of a great accomplishment, or also just kind of like the Oscars and the award shows do, is like acknowledging like if someone has passed away, if we've lost, a major volunteer or founder or a major donor of that kind. And then, as Joan was speaking to, the usual kind, instead of physical objects and plaques and things that are more traditional, but it's going to save your budget to do a lot of these online and virtual things. You don't need to rent a giant hall space. You don't need to have a giant meal served. So I know because I've produced a lot of events, that's a major expense in any volunteer recognition or fundraising event. And I'm going to have Todd and then Jared pop in. But Todd, talk about gamification and informal and partnerships and how that's really come into play this year.
And thank you, Dana. And as you probably know, my voice of the voices, at least on this topic, is to keep it informal, keep it fun, keep it simple, keep it totally unrelated to your work, wear a silly hat, do whatever it takes in order to just make people happy. One point I'm going to make really quick, and it's on the bottom of our screen here, is that we spent an awful lot of time in Zoom or the WebEx this past year, and of course none of it, or not all of it, is related to our specific work with your organizations, our organization, whatever. So you can recognize super Zoomers. You just put a poll question out. You can even send it out through VSys, by the way, all right? And just ask your volunteers, hey, how many hours have you spent on Zoom this year? Give us a guesstimate, and for anybody who's over some huge number, pick it out of the air. Okay, they get the Super Zoomer award. Well, you can even turn that in. Let me transition a little bit here to gamification. All right, you can turn that into a bit of a competition. Everybody who is over 200 hours on Zoom and can prove it, gets this award. But then they can kind of fight with each other. Oh no, really, I just found 50 more hours that I did with this. And oh, if you include my grandkids, well, no, that's 300 more hours. Okay, that I picked up this year, and I get the award. And it could be the dumbest award in the world, but they're still having fun, okay? And that competing with each other in a fun way, Dana mentioned it, that's called gamification. She and I did a big presentation with the Points of Life Foundation last summer. We're trying to get the link to it that we'll put up on the Voices page, and so you can come and watch that. But the point is that you can have a lot of fun inducing competition. And of course, Dana, I can't move forward without mentioning the purple peacock feather. All right. So there's a true story out of a zoo that was a customer of mine years ago, where the staff noticed that some volunteer had grabbed a peacock feather off of the ground, didn't bother the poor peacock, okay, all right, because it was already
They get them all the time.
Yeah, get them constantly. Okay, picked it up off the ground, grabbed a paint can of purple paint, painted the purple peacock feather, all right, and was carrying it around in the back of their back pocket, just wandering around the zoo with a purple peacock feather in the back pocket.
Let me summarize. They painted a purple peacock feather, put it in their pocket, and transported it across the zoo. Got it. Okay.
Right. Well, there's got to be another the park. Okay, there's another P in there. I guess. All right. Okay. The point being
paraded around the park with the purple peacock feather in their pocket.
Around the park with the peacock feather. Right. So, and the staff had no clue what was the thing with the purple peacock feather in the park, okay, that was wandering around. It was just prancing around the park, and it was in a different volunteer's back pocket every single day, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, and staff had no clue, but the volunteers loved it. They had developed their own system of recognition for some stupid set of things, okay, and they were just running with it, and so the next year it didn't get going again, and so the staff painted a purple peacock feather and just dropped it in the volunteer lounge, and the thing just took off again. All right, and to this day, they have no idea what it was about. The point being that you can encourage fun, recognition, and other ways than the traditional, and certainly at zero cost. I don't think the peacock minded one single bit.
Not at all.
A can of spray paint and a silly hat, and you've got recognition under control.
Exactly. So I'm going to have Jared give some of his examples. I'll give some of mine while Lisa puts up our next poll question, which is around how are you planning recognition awards and ceremonies this year? Yes, being formative is a pass. B, not sure how to do it. C, still undecided. And part 2 of the poll question, if you are planning an event this year, will it be in person, as you always do, B, trying something new, virtual or hybrid, C, virtual or hybrid, which is the norm for us, or D, other. And while you're pondering that poll question, I worked with the San Francisco Zoo many years ago, for some years, and another example of something, if you're doing something, if a tangible object, if you're not doing everything virtually, what do you already have around? You've got a purple peacock feather in the San Francisco Zoo. We had a lot of extra ostrich eggs all the time, and it became a fun thing for the summer team programs to clean out the eggs, blow out the eggs, and decorate them. And so adult and youth volunteers would then get the Good Egg Award. So it's a silly pun, it's goofy, but people really valued, even though there's tons of them around, they valued a special decorated egg. So Jared, I know you've got some funny ones as well.
Sure. Well, I just want to jump in and piggyback on something that Todd had said, because you can't beat the example of the purple peacock feather in the park.
Well, it's a challenge.
Well, all I want to say is,
buddy, game on.
All right, here we go. No, all I want to say is that he made a point that was generated from the volunteers themselves. It was a great way for them to engage with each other and to really make something of it. My point that I want to throw in there is that you don't have to do this alone. You can have a committee that helps plan your award ceremony or your recognition event or your recognition program or your retention program. It's absolutely okay to pull volunteers into that, especially if they're not doing their normal job because they can't be on site. So that's just one point, pull a few volunteers, and that's also a great way to recognize them. Say, hey, you've been doing this for years. You know what volunteers want. We're leaning on you and your expertise and your experience. And that's a subtle way to thank those volunteers that join the planning committee. But also it gives them an opportunity to help recognize folks in a way that's more meaningful to them because it's coming from the actual users themselves. For a better term, the practitioners or the participants, the volunteers. So that's the first point. The second thing I want to mention is whenever I work with any organization that says, we don't have a budget, and this is kind of piggybacking on what Joan had said a few minutes ago, we don't have a budget for it this year, or they slashed our budget, or we used to do this, but we don't now. And so if you're at a point where you're either building or rebuilding a program, there's 2 things I like to remind folks of that are important, and they're kind of all year things. But if you can recognize your volunteers once or twice individually, so thanking them personally, sending them a birthday card, sending them a volunteer anniversary card, an accomplishment card, hey, you did 500 hours, and thank them personally, whether it's an email, a phone call, if you can do it in person. If you can get it in writing and have it be something that they can review later, reflect on later, that's nice. So even an email is better than nothing. If you can do an e-card, great. If you can do a physical card, even better. But that reaching out and thanking them individually, I like to do it twice a year personally, and then twice a year as a group. So if that means listing all your volunteers in your annual report, or a thoughtful message from the executive director, or the CEO, or from you, or the program director, thanking volunteers in a public-facing document, whether it's a newsletter or that annual report, or an e-blast. But having a voice from higher up in the organization, thank the entire group. With specific examples, if you can. And so a couple of opportunities to do that would be, at the end of the year, if you send out a holiday message, put in a nice message about how things wouldn't have been the same without the volunteers. And so those are simple ways, 2 times individually and 2 times collectively. That's a great foundation of a recognition program. And then you can start to layer in the awards, the events, the tchotchkes or anything else like that to build on that. But that way you're really establishing that culture of recognition and appreciation. And it doesn't take a whole big budget, to do that. People understand this has been a rough past year. Things aren't always going to be the same as they were before. But if you can maintain that culture of appreciation, that'll go a long way.
Yeah. Smiles are free. Thank yous are free. I always tell people that the superpower that propelled me into this career is I've always been very, very good at remembering people's names right after I meet them. And I know that that's a miraculous superpower for so many people. And that's come in really handy with in person and even online of like, oh, yes, I remember you from, I'm still in touch on Facebook and friends with people that were volunteers that I worked with, 10 and 20 years ago with different organizations, and just kind of maintaining that constant, consistent engagement relationship. We've got our poll answers, and absolutely no surprise. Are you planning an event? The vast majority of those who could answer said, still deciding. And again, that's probably why you're listening in today, but we want to get these snapshots and see where people are. Only 2 respondents are yes, we're kind of doing it the way we always have. And as far as like whether you're going to do it in person, hybrid, again, the vast majority are trying to do some sort of pivot, adaptation, online, remote thing. A couple of people are doing a little bit of a hybrid. Some people might be in person, some others. But that's not at all surprising. So it's good to hear from those of you who could access and answer the poll how that is going for you, because that's pretty typical. I'll also add, as Lisa is doing her awesome note-taking thing before we move to the next slide, that it's very important to ask your volunteers, to Jared's and Todd's and Joan's questions, like, how do people want to be recognized? Because we certainly know that not everybody wants a big party. I was with agencies for years where the same, 100 people out of 1,000 volunteers, the same 100 people liked to have a party and always showed up to the party. And there was very little change in who wanted to be at the party. And a lot of other people will answer if you ask them, like, how do you like to be valued and recognized? They'll say, don't spend money on me. Don't buy me a plaque. Don't buy me a little knickknack. Put it back into the program, or do something like send me an e-card or mention my name. The other thing that's, and Adrian says in the chat, many volunteers want a better sense of volunteer community where they can connect versus any sort of prize or monetary thing or anything like that. And that's a great point, Adrian. Hopefully I'm saying your name correctly. That, if you don't ask, you don't know. And so a huge part of recognition is not assuming that everybody wants a party or a plaque, because my experience has been the vast majority don't. And sometimes it's because they're introverted, and we want to respect that too, and not pull people out of the shell if they want to be a little more anonymous and not as recognized. But it's that moment and that relationship building and that ongoing consistent engagement and meeting people where they are and how they want that recognition that is our job, is adapting to that rather than somebody else in the organization or even the department saying, we should have a big party for everybody. It's like, well, who wants a party and who just wants, a funny award ceremony online, or just to get that e-card or get that e-certificate that's been personalized. Another funny example over the years is I've worked a lot with animal and conservation and land conservation agencies and people who work outside. So we had a Yeti of the Year for kind of some of our all-weather volunteers who would do maintenance or repairs or trail work or work with the animals kind of under any conditions. And that was just, people thought it was hilarious. Like, who was going to get the Yeti of the Year for, working out in a storm and really going above and beyond?
Yeah, if I can, and I love that idea. Yeah. Okay, but I'm going to stitch together some of the things that everybody's been saying. You, Adrian, and Jared, if we take all of your comments and put them together, you could recruit a volunteer to do a Facebook group, for example. There's many different mediums, all right? And through that group, determine what everybody's favorite form of recognition is. Just give the task to the volunteer who's running the group, somebody that you trust, all right? And they'll very surreptitiously, if you will, gather some anecdotal information about things that people like, whether it's recognition or just objects, or, again, the funny things that they might have done or the great things that they might have done this past year. They can kind of pass that to you. You can do a virtual ceremony. We'll talk a little bit about how to do that. And then you're golden, okay? And it's informal and it's fun and it's unexpected, which people love, all right? That it come out of the blue, as a result of some sidebar conversation that they thought they were having with a friend, okay? And it's just, and it's just more personalized that way. And it's more fun, okay? So, and it doesn't cost you a dime or a minute.
Yeah. And if Lisa, in her fantastic typing skills, if we can go, for those who can't see the slides easily, to sample COVID-era award categories, and this is just some brainstorming that we've done in the panel that we've heard from some other people, just as ideas and jumping off points, since the polls are reflecting that we're like, oh, we're undecided, we're not sure how this is going, and hey, this is why we're all here today. Sample COVID-era award categories, things that we've mentioned before: community champions, living differently, crisis response, raising in excellence, and the thing that I think is really coming into its own as a recognition form is mention people on your social media, celebrate them in Facebook posts and Facebook groups, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram. Instagram is really big. All of these social media platforms have different audiences and different demographics, and part of what you can ask your volunteers is, do you have, are you on social media on this? And so kind of, it doesn't take a lot of time and it doesn't cost anything to just tailor a shout out. If you know someone's on Instagram and that's their main form of social media, say, hey, we're really glad to see, Joey Smith is the Yeti of the Year, and here's a picture of him, in the snow, shoveling, clearing our ramp so that clients can come into the building. Whatever that is, make it personal, and it just takes a moment, a social media mention, and that's part of that ongoing engagement. So Victoria mentions, I'm reading from the chat here, that we've tried to take pictures of volunteers coming in to get vaccinated, and then we share these pictures with all volunteers in the weekly newsletter. These pictures are often volunteers posing with hospital staff. We do this to engage and recognize our volunteers and showcase our organization's efforts and the relationships between volunteers and hospital staff. And Victoria, that is a fantastic thing to do. It's a very now thing to do, and it has that engagement, not just person to person, but also showing that we care about our volunteers, and it's our priority to that you vaccinated so that we can return to as normal as possible operations. Joan, what have you heard around volunteers recognition, almost kind of care or vaccination as its own reward? Because it is in its own way that getting a spot to get a vaccine has kind of become a reward mechanism to get people back into service faster.
We can go out to eat now.
I know. There you go.
Joan probably can.
Yeah.
Joan, you're muted.
Oh.
Joan, you're muted.
Unmute, Joan.
I'm sorry.
There you go.
It depends on where you are because we still can't. We are in Sacramento. We are in COVID HE double hockey stick right now.
Yep.
So that leads me back to the availability of the vaccine and how that might affect your award ceremonies. Some organizations across the country are even at the point, there are very few of them, that are planning like outdoor picnics as more or less a traditional event. The reason they're still going that route is because of the digital divide. A lot of their volunteers are not on Facebook, they're not on Instagram, and then a lot of people have the majority of their volunteers are 65 and 75 and older. So vaccines, awards, age, digital divide, all play into your thinking as you plan your award ceremony. You're going to have different awards maybe for different parts of your volunteer sector. And as Dana mentioned, partnering with your marketing and communications department, if you have one, is a really good idea because they will help you with your newsletter and maybe they already have awards categories for using to take staff to organizations that they can incorporate into the hospital newsletter and make sure there's always an article in there for the digital divide folks about, awarding and recognizing volunteer workforce. The other thing I wanted to say was themes. We've had a lot of questions about themes. And some people have even asked, should we even use the vaccine somehow as part of our theme? I'm not sure about that. We have lists of themes that we've used in the past. I'll send them to Lisa and Todd to post on the website. You can have a theme, but you want to tie it into COVID. I'm just saying, this is what I'm listening to as people are thinking things out loud, And so
go to the next slide too. Thanks.
Yeah, and the award categories in these sample COVID era award categories tie into that theme, community champions, delivering differently.
And before we dive into that next slide, I think, Joan, I'm going to take off on that for just a second and announce that, and this is actually news to everybody, our topic for this webinar next month is going to be basically what Joan was just talking about. We're going to be focusing on COVID relief and how each of you guys are handling that, how you might be able to help each other, how the technology can help you. That's obviously timely. We're all in the midst of it, and we want to hear best practices. We want to convey best practices that we're already hearing from various customers across our we have 600-700 hospitals as customers, so we're getting a lot of input. We want to be able to share that, so it's going to be a great topic, and we'll work on that with some of what Joan was just saying too.
And I've got something in the chat from Adrienne again that she says we've been posting on our website volunteer spotlights and asking the volunteers to send in their photo and providing testimonials, and that gets back to again a point that all the VSys voices and many of you in the chat today have made that. Check in with the volunteers themselves, like how do they want to be recognized, how can they participate, and asking them to do an action item like make a little video and things like that can be a way, if we know that people have that technology and are comfortable with it, that's a way for them to participate and share, that you don't have to be in charge of that production, you become a production supervisor. So in our last 10-15 minutes, we want to ask another poll question. Do you have access to any of the following: Zoom, WebEx, GoToMeeting, FaceTime, Google Teams, or none of the above? And part 2 of that poll question is, if you have access to video conferencing tools, are you A, very comfortable with them, B, just a little comfortable with them, C, uncomfortable with them, D, really dislike them and don't want any part of video conferencing? So while you are answering that, Lisa, do we have the slide that talks about virtual productions, best and worst platforms, and that? Do we still have that slide handy?
Oh dear, let me go see.
Lisa,
go ahead,
while you're looking,
Thank
you, Dana. I was just going to jump in and tie something back to the theme. If you're tastefully using the pandemic as a theme. You could even use things like the Golden Mask Award, or if you're looking for tchotchkes that are, maybe you can squeeze them in the budget. If you give out masks, you have there's 100 companies or more that make specialized masks, and if you ordered masks that just said volunteer across them, or your logo and volunteer,
it's a great idea, Jared, but it has to be purple. I'm sorry.
The Purple Mask Award.
Right.
I'm sure you can get purple masks, and that's just something to consider. That and you could even make if you were going to stick to, you can go cross-platform. You can have the award, put it in the newsletter, post about it on your social media if you're allowed to, send it out in an e-blast if you can, hang a picture in the in the office. But you could have something that says like notable mask wearers, and have Batman and Spider-Man and any superhero that wears a mask, and then a picture of your volunteers mixed into it.
Yeah.
Kind of almost like a Zoom chat.
Yeah, good idea.
And that way you're sticking to the theme without making light of the pandemic or the people who have suffered from it, but you're celebrating our ingenuity, or however you want to look at it. Creativeness.
Yeah,
that's what I'm looking for.
That's important, and I'm going to dovetail on it again, Barrett, but only on the opposite extreme. I think, and I don't want to, say this indelicately by any means, all right, but we've all lost people, to the pandemic, and that also needs to be appropriately, how I've used the word celebrated here. They need to be celebrated. The service that they did needs to be celebrated, and we all need a chance to do it. And so now, on top of all the other crazy factors that Joan just mentioned that have to go into your awards ceremony, you've got to somehow address that too, because it also cannot and should not be ignored.
I want to add one thing that surprised me. We had a call on Tuesday or Wednesday, and usually when looking at awards and how we've done things in the past, certificates from the governor, local politicians, award categories at the state level were always very popular. And I was so surprised to hear our committee say, we don't want anyone from the political scene to be part of our award ceremony this year. It's just too much of a controversial arena, I was shocked. So now we're going to look for people to be part of our award ceremony in California you can do it easily, that are celebrities, popular. And so no certificates from the local governor or congressman or whatever. So that's another thing you might want to take into consideration. Because I'm in the weeds in award planning, And so that was a pretty significant change we made.
Exactly. So we've got our poll answers, and no big surprise. Most people are using and very comfortable with Zoom, some on WebEx, which is the platform we're on now. A few people are using Teams. No one who's in the call right now is using GoToMeeting. One person's using FaceTime. And again, for the most part, the majority are very comfortable. I think by now people have definitely upped their skill level in the last year of having to adapt to this. And a small percentage, a few people are still kind of getting used to it or perhaps adjusting. I want to, before we wrap up, since we've got about 8 minutes left, I do want to mention that having a virtual production, which we've at least touched upon, doing an award ceremony, things like that, that is, and it may very well be, its own subject. So that's something that's my expertise, is media production.
Oh, Dan, I'm sorry. I should have mentioned this to you before the show. We actually got approval for your idea.
Oh, we did! Yay!
To do a separate production of that. So we're going to do, we're all going to do our own production on how to do a production.
Yay! Okay. That's good news. It was I got thank you. That's
so
great news.
So we'll pre-record that for you folks and get it out there separate from this webinar series.
Wonderful. And what that will entail, just as a preview, and also things to think about as we send out emails and resources and put resources up on the VSys Voices pages, is the best and worst platforms like Twitch, FaceTime, YouTube, Zoom to do an event like that it really does take a production plan and a script. And also, there's been a lot of great lessons, for better or for worse, of what worked and what didn't. And usually the key is having something as much as possible pre-recorded. And that's what a lot of conferences are doing right now as well, including Points of Light and MAVA and some of the larger conferences are asking participants in 2020 and 2021 to pre-record things. So we've got about 5 minutes left. Can I just get about a 10 to 15 second wrap up final point from everybody, and we'll go with Jared first.
Sure. The one point I really like to reiterate is recognition is an all-year process, and it fits into every single step of the volunteer management process. So from the moment you interview someone, right through until you're doing an evaluation, every single step along the way, you've got an opportunity to recognize people with the professionalism that shows appreciation for their time, the seriousness you have to, toward their contribution, those regular check-ins or like that 90-day eval, just to sort of follow up you have to those, all that builds that sense of appreciation. And that's, I think, a great foundation. And then your awards, your recognition events, or however you're going to handle that this year and next, or last year and this, will be all the more meaningful because people will know that you're not just doing this for the sake of doing it because you have to, but that it's the culmination of all the appreciation you have all year long.
Yeah, wonderful. Joan, go ahead with a wrap-up thought, if you're unmuted.
I'm trying to be a good Alice, I'm muting. Free yourself up from the traditional awards planning. Myself, I've been planning awards for years, and it has been kind of interesting to just lift myself out of that, deal with all the committees that I'm dealing with, and see how they are redefining what awards are, at least for 2021, and make the celebrities that you want to incorporate into your event instead of the politicians and the traditional people. Make them your own hospital staff, your own hospital administration. They are the celebrities of 2020 and 2021.
Amen.
So that's kind of how I think about it. Your awards plan needs to be different, and consider those COVID award categories in the slide. Create your own. My point is, just don't try and redo your traditional awards, pins, plaques, hours. It's harder to do that than it is to just shift to this year into something a little bit different in terms of your formal awards. Jared was talking about your informal recognition activities. If you want formal awards activities this year, rethink them. Rethink the timing, rethink the budget, rethink the service delivery mechanism, rethink the categories. Free yourself up to do that.
Yep, wonderful. Todd, final thoughts.
Yeah, just recapping on everything that everybody is saying. Keep it informal as much as you can. Recruit some help from outside, either volunteers doing social groups or socialization. Don't forget the Purple Peacock out there, and all this stuff like the Good Egg Award that you can have fun with. Wear your silly hat, okay, in both metaphor and real terms. And if you need to recruit extra help from the community, do it. There are acting companies, improv companies out there who are bored at the moment, who can maybe take over the production or facilitate it, even online, and get people laughing. This is a year when that's really, really important. So celebrate everything that's good and have fun doing it. And if you need help with that, give us a call. By the way, Dana mentioned that she has a lot of production background. She's available to you guys to a degree, even free of charge. Give us a call. Let me know, and we'll make arrangements. She's great.
Yeah, that's part of the benefit that you're all tied into automatically with us on the VSys Voices. Is we're here for you. We're resources for you. We'll generate these panels. We've got a lot. Follow us on Facebook and LinkedIn. And as you've got, for those of you who can see the screen, we have a whole VSys Voices resource page. And as a preview to some of the production tips and basic production tips to pivot to virtual events that are cost-effective and fun for everybody and not too much of a headache. We've got a good kind of like 1 or 2 page PDF on best practices for virtual events. And we're really glad that all of you are joining us today. Again, we're here for you. This is your resource as VSys One and Bespoke Software customers. Reach out to us with questions. Check out the resources we have for you. We really appreciate you, especially those on the West Coast for whom this is quite early, tuning in to our recognition webinar today and much more. You can also give us ideas of what you want to hear about, what you want to learn about. We're always planning these a few months in advance, but this is for you. This is why we're all doing this, and we really appreciate your participation. And again, follow us on the socials, and you'll get lots of more resources in between the panels that we're doing. So thank you so much for tuning in today. And thank you, Todd and Jared and Joan and the hardest working woman in show business, Lisa for printing all the slides and typing all the notes all at the same time. We really, we're here for you, and we're all in this together, and we're going to get through this with each other and sharing each other's knowledge and wisdom. So thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.
And Dana, thank you for managing such a free-flowing platform today. It was great. I really appreciated it. So thank you.
Yep.
My pleasure.
Y'all have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Hey, Todd, you still there?
Yes, sir.
Hey, you want to connect this afternoon sometime? I've got to get my kids fed. Lunchtime over here.
Yeah, just give me a ring on my cell phone. Same story.
Cool.